Afternoon guys, this is Coffee with Gaz, where we discuss questions that have been asked by you guys. You know, sometimes they're questions, sometimes it will be more maybe topics that have come off some of the questions that you have asked. But this week, what we're going to be talking about is low back pain. And the question in particular is it safe to train if I have low back pain? Okay, so this person in particular, they've had some flare-ups of low back pain over time. Okay, there wasn't a massive acute incident that led to this low back pain, but it comes and it goes and it ebbs and it flows, okay, as low back pain tends to, as pain tends to in general. But the question really is can I train? I want to train, can I train? And this is something that a lot of lifters have to deal with, a lot of runners have to deal with, a lot of cyclists have to deal with, and it's always very upsetting to hear when someone has been told that they're no longer able to train. Okay, I heard a story of a girl recently who, she loved swimming, but she was told that she was basically couldn't swim anymore, and that was it. She basically just stopped swimming for years and years and years and years. And same story I actually heard recently in relation to running. And when you start to take people away from their activities and tell them that they're no longer to engage in activities that are meaningful to them, that contribute to their psychological well-being, to their social well-being, that's a really important consideration, is that a lot of people get into activity, into the gym, into exercise, into sport for the purpose of engaging socially with other individuals, and you can essentially cut those ties if you start to tell someone that they're no longer able to engage in that activity. So as physiotherapists, as trainers, etc., healthcare professionals, the goal should always be to enhance someone's ability to engage in the things that are meaningful to them. That should be a primary goal all of the time, and it should be a last resort to tell someone that they're not able to do the things that they love doing. Okay, really important. So, is it safe? Most of the time, I would say yes. Okay, there are some instances in which one might want to advise against lifting or against doing any sort of exercise. For example, if someone has significant vertebral fractures, they've been in a car crash, or maybe they've got osteoporosis or whatever, and they've had some fractures, there might be a case where a doctor says, or the orthopedic surgeon says, look, I'd like you to remain inactive and refrain from engaging these activities for a number of weeks until we allow for that bone healing to take place. Very reasonable, okay? And in that case, we're going to be like, okay, it's very clear that there is a specific deficit, there's a specific problem, that a healing time is required, and so we don't want to interrupt that healing process. However, for the vast majority of cases of low back pain, we're dealing with problems that, they don't necessarily require you to deload or to totally unload for them to improve or for them to quote-unquote heal, so to speak. Heal can be misleading at times, because a lot of the time we're not actually trying to heal any particular structure. There's not any particular structure that we can pinpoint and say that is the definitive problem, A lot of the times what happens is people will have low back pain and they'll go and get an MRI or something like that, and they'll be told that, oh, I've got disc degeneration at L4, L5, I've got a bulging disc at L5, S1, and they'll freak out about that, and they're like, I can't lift because I've got these problems. Whereas we see these problems very frequently in asymptomatic populations. So we know that these problems can persist in asymptomatic individuals, and it sort of gets at the question, which almost becomes philosophical, of what is pathology? What is an actual problem? If these things are so common in the general population, at what point do we call them pathological, and at what point is treatment necessitated? Because essentially what we're talking about here is the symptoms as being restrictive, the symptom of pain as being restrictive, that experience as being restrictive. And we're not going to start, if we wouldn't start screening people in the general population and tell them to stop doing their activities, for example, if someone has no symptoms and they've got disc degeneration, which is a normal part of aging, we're not just going to say, oh, stop, you got to let that heal up. It's I'm just aging, it's like gray hair, these things happen. They may be viewed as imperfections, but they're not necessarily abnormal, especially as one ages. So basically, in the vast majority of cases of low back pain, it would be absolutely advised for you to continue remaining active, continue exercising, because it tends to lead to improvements. That includes studies that have been carried out on resistance training and on different group exercise interventions. To be fair, very often these resistance training studies, like they classify resistance training as being something different to what me and you might consider resistance training to be. Like they're not doing like sets of 5 on squats or whatever, but there are no reasons to believe that someone with low back pain just should not exercise, should not lift weights, you know. So I would always encourage people to feel confident that they're able to go forward and to continue training. You know, there may be periods of time where your symptoms simply do not allow for that. You know, for example, if you've got some sort of radiculopathy, like for example, if you've got, you know, sharp shooting nerve, quote unquote, nerve pain or tingling down the back of your leg, you know, that might make lifting quite difficult, and you may need to be quite restrictive in terms of your symptoms. And that's something, you know, a physiotherapist would typically work with you on to get you to the point where, you know, you're actually tolerating load a bit better, you're building up your tolerance, building up your capacity. But the vast majority of people, they're typically dealing with, you know, some sort of lower back discomfort that comes about through lifting or separate to lifting, and they're wondering, can I keep training? And my advice would be yes, absolutely. We want you to keep training. However, what that does not mean is that if you are in pain, you need to go in and hit your heavy triples, hit your heavy fives, hit your heavy singles. Absolutely not. You can instead make some adjustments to your program to make it a bit more tolerable, because that's the goal. The goal is not to just push through pain all the time. The goal is to say, okay, what could I modify in my program to enable me to continue training, because this is something that's meaningful to me, the adaptations are important to me, the process is important to me. And that could be something like doing less intense work, relatively or absolutely, on exercises that seem to load the lower back or aggravate it maybe a little bit more. So potentially you could say, I'm going to do all my squats in the range of RPE 6 to RPE 7. So you're leaving 3 or 4 reps in the tank. I'm going to do all my squats in that range, and instead of doing sets of 3 to 5, I'm going to do sets of 8 to 12. So you're now working with a relatively low percentage of your 1 repetition max, and you're also working at a lower level of relative effort, in that you're much further from failure. So you're still getting a training stimulus in, you're still ensuring that it's not as much of a disruptive process when you have to resume normal training, but you're still doing what is required for you to manage your symptoms. And that's really important in this case, is maintaining your self-efficacy, you know, feeling like I'm actually in control. I've got control of my program, and I know what I can change in order to manage my symptoms, and I'm going to nudge forward as I can. And then you recognize that there may be bumps in the road. There may be points where, oh, I had a bad day. But what you do is you use that self-efficacy and you say that I'm still just going to adjust my program in line with, you know, my symptoms. So it might be the case that, God, these squats, I'm really not having it. You know, it's just not feeling good. It's never feeling good. What you might do is do something like a goblet squat, or you might do something like a leg press, but you're continuing to train. Like that's the key, is like you're continuing to train, you're continuing to do something. And you know, if you're not a lifter, similar things apply. It may be the case that running, it's just not sitting well with you at the moment, but there's plenty of, you know, stationary bikes, there's plenty of swimming pools around the place. You've got options to continue exercising, and what we would never encourage is for someone to not exercise because they have back pain. You know, it's generally not a good idea. Rest is typically not advised. Like, we're typically advising people to stay active. It's one of the best things you can do, and you don't want to get into that cycle of, you know, essentially fear avoidance behavior. You don't want to get into that cycle of being afraid to move, you know, developing that kinesiophobia, fear of movement, and then struggling to get back to your normal tasks. Okay, so you want to keep up your activity, you want to keep up your work as best as you can, while recognizing where your limits actually are. And obviously that is an individual thing, but they would be my best tips for people trying to train with low back pain. So always feel like you have that freedom. Always, you know, take the steps that you need to adjust your program, but you should also do all that you can to continue engaging in the activities that are meaningful for you. So if you have any other questions, of course, drop them down below and I'll discuss them in a future video. And yeah, thank you for watching. Remember, of course, be happy, and remember that it is too easy.